What is guerrilla warfare? In a war of revolutionary character, guerrilla IA operations are a necessary part. Thispatiku. Lally true in a war waged for the emancipation of a people. Who inhabit a vast nation, each in is such a nation, whose techniques are undeveloped and whose communica scions are poor. She finds herself confronted with a strong and victorious Japanese imperialism. Under these circumstances, the development of the type of guerrilla warfare characterized by the quality of mass both necessary and natural. This warfare must be developed to an unprecedented degree and must coordinate with the operations of regular armies. If we to do, we will find difficult to defeat the enemy. These guerrilla operations must not be considered as an independent form of warfare. They are but one step in the total war, one aspect of the revolutionary struggle. They are the inevitable result of the clash between oppressor and oppressed when the latter reach the limits of their endurance. In our case, these hostilities began at a time when the people are unable to endure any more from the Japanese imperialists. Lenin, in People and Revolution, said, "A people's insurrection and a people's revolution." 41. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. We consider guerrilla are not only natural but inevitable operations as but one aspect of our total or mass war because they, lacking the quality of independence, are of themselves incapable of providing a solution to the struggle. Guerrilla warfare has qualities and objectives peculiar to itself. It is a weapon that a nation inferior in arms and military equipment may employ against a more powerful aggressor nation. When the invader pierces deep into the heart of the weaker country and occupies her territory in a cruel and oppressive manner, there no doubt that conditions of terrain, climate, and society in general offer obstacles to his progress and may be used to advantage by those who oppose him. In guerrilla warfare, we turn these advantages to the purpose of resisting and defeating the enemy. During the progress of guerrillas gradually develop into orthodox forces that operate in conjunction with other units of the regular army, thus the regularly organized troops, those guerrillas who have attained that status, and those who have not reached that level of development combine to form the military power of a national revolutionary war. There can be no doubt that the ultimate result of this will be victory. Both in development and in method of application, guerrilla warfare has certain distinctive characteristics. Discuss the relationship of guerrilla warfare to national policy. Because of the resistance of a semi-colonial country against an imperialism, our hostilities must have a clearly defined political goal and firmly established political responsibilities. Our basic policy, the creation of a national. 42. Yukai-chan. United NTI, Japanese Front. TI's policy we pursue in order to gain our political goal, which the complete emancipation of the Chinese people. There are certain fundamental steps necessary in the realization of this policy, to wit. F. 1. Arousing and organizing the people. 2. Achieving internal unification politically, establishing bases, equipping forces, recovering national strength, destroying enemy's national strength, regaining lost territories. There is no reason to consider guerrilla warfare separately from national policy. On the contrary, must be organized and conducted in complete accord with national anti-Japanese policy. It is only those who misinterpret guerrilla action who say, as does Genshi Shan, the question of guerrilla hostilities purely a military matter and not a political one. Those who maintain this simple point of view have sight of the political goal and the political effects of guerrilla action. Such a simple point of view will cause the people to lose confidence and will result in our defeat. What the relationship of guerrilla warfare to the PIA? Pi without a political goal, guerrilla warfare must if its political objectives do not coincide with the aspirations of the people and their sympathy, cooperation, and assistance cannot be gained. The essence of guerrilla warfare thus revolutionary in character. On the other. 43. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. And, in a war of counter-revolutionary nature, there is no place for guerrilla hostilities, because guerrilla warfare basically derives from the masses and supported by them. It can neither exist nor flourish if it separates from their sympathies and cooperation. There are those who do not comprehend guerrilla action, and who therefore do not understand the distinguishing qualities of a people's guerrilla war, who say, only regular troops can carry on guerrilla operations. There are others who, because they do not believe in the ultimate success of guerrilla action, mistakenly say, guerrilla warfare an insignificant and highly specialized type of operation in which there is no place for the masses of the people. Then there are those who ridicule the masses and undermine resistance by wildly asserting that the people have no understanding of the war of resistance. C18, for one, the moment that this war of resistance dissociates from the masses of the people, the precise moment that dissociates from hope of ultimate victory over the Japanese. What the organization for guerrilla warfare, though all guerrilla bands that spring from the masses of the PIA suffer from lack of organization at the time of their formation, they have in common a basic quality that makes organization possible. All guerrilla units must have political and military leadership. This true regardless why of the source or size of such units. Such units may originate locally, in the masses of the people. They may be formed from an admixture of regular troops with groups of the people, or they may consist of regular army units intact. 44. Yukai-chan. J and mere quantity does not affect this matter. Such units may consist of a squad of a few men, a battalion of several 100 men, or a regiment of several thousand men. VJ all these must have leaders who are unyielding in their policies, resolute, loyal, sincere, and focused. These men must be well educated in revolutionary technique. J. Confident, able to establish severe discipline, and able to cope with counter-propaganda. In short, these leaders must be models for the people. As the war progresses, such a leaders will gradually overcome the lack of discipline, which at prevails, they will establish discipline in their forces, strengthening them and increasing their combat efficiency. Thus eventual victory will be attained. Unorganized guerrilla warfare cannot contribute to victory, and those who attack the movement as a combination of banditry and anarchism do not understand the nature of guerrilla action. They say, this movement a haven for disappointed militarists, vagabonds and bandits, hoping thus to bring the movement into. We do not deny that there are corrupt guerrillas, repute, nor that there are people who under the guise of guerrillas indulge in unlawful. Neither do we deny that the movement has at the present time symptoms of a lack of organization, symptoms that might indeed be serious. Were we to judge guerrilla warfare solely by the corrupt and temporary phenomena we have mentioned, we should study the corrupt phenomena and attempt to eradicate them in order to encourage guerrilla warfare, and to increase military efficiency. This hard work, there no help for, and the problem cannot be solved immediately. 45. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. 8. The whole people must try to reform themselves during the course of the war. We must educate them and reform them in the light of past experience. Evil does not exist in guerrilla warfare but only in the unorganized and undisciplined activities that are anarchism, said Lenin, in On Guerrilla Warfare. What basic guerrilla strategy? A guerrilla strategy must be based primarily on alertness, mobility, and attack. Must be adjusted to the enemy situation, the terrain, the existing lines of communication, the relative strengths, the weather, and the situation of the people. In guerrilla warfare, select the tactic of seeming to come from the east and attacking from the west. Avoid the solid, attack the hollow, attack, withdraw, deliver a lightning a blow, seek a lightning decision. When guerrillas engage a stronger enemy, they withdraw when he advances, harass him when he stops, strike him when he weary, pursue him when he withdraws. In guerrilla strategy, the enemy's rear, flanks, and other vulnerable spots are his points. And there he must be harassed, attacked, dispersed, exhausted and annihilated. Only in this way can guerrillas carry out their mission of independent guerrilla action and coordination with the effort of the regular armies. But, in spite of the most complete preparation, there can be no victory. Mistakes are made in the matter of command. Guerrilla warfare based on the principles we have mentioned and carried on over a vast extent of territory in which, presumably, Mao here to the essay that has been English under the title Partisan Warfare. See Ohis, 2, number 194-208, SBG. 46. Yu Kai-chan. Communications are inconvenient will contribute tremendously towards ultimate defeat of the Japanese and consequent emancipation of the Chinese people. A careful distinction must be made between two types of guerrilla warfare. The fact that Rev 6 illusionary guerrilla warfare based on the masses of the people does not mean that the organization of guerrilla units impossible in a war of counter-revolutionary character. As examples of the former type we may cite Red guerrilla hostilities during the Russian Revolution, those of the Reds in China, of the Abyssinians against the Italians for the past 3 years, those of the 7 years in Manchuria, and the vast anti-Japanese guerrilla war that carried on in China today. All these struggles have been carried on in the interests of the whole people, or the greater part of them had a broad basis in the national manpower, and have been in accord with the laws of historical development. They have existed and will continue to flourish, and develop as long as they are not contrary to national policy. The second type of guerrilla warfare directly contradicts the law of historical development. Of this type, we may cite the examples furnished by the White Russian guerrilla units organized by Denikin and Kolchak, those organized by the Japanese, those organized by the Italians in Abyss, those supported by the puppet governments in Manchuria and Mongolia, and those that will be organized here by Chinese. All such have oppressed the masses and have been contrary to the true interests of the people. They must be firmly opposed. They are easy to destroy because they lack a broad foundation in the people. 47. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. If we to differentiate between the two types of guerrilla hostilities mentioned, it is likely that we will exaggerate their effect when applied by an invader. We might arrive at the conclusion that the invader can organize guerrilla units from among the people. Such a conclusion might well diminish our confidence in guerrilla warfare. As far as this matter concerned, we have but to remember the historical experience of revolutionary struggles. Further, we must distinguish general revolutionary wars from those of a purely class type. In the former case, the whole people of a nation, without regard to class or party, carry on a guerrilla struggle that an instrument of the national policy basis, therefore, much broader than the basis of a struggle of class type, of a general guerrilla war, has been said. When a nation invaded, the people become sympathetic to one another and aid organizing guerrilla units. In war, no matter to what extent guerrillas are developed, they do not produce the same results as when they are formed to an invasion by foreigners. See Civil War in Russia. The one strong feature of guerrilla warfare in a struggle is its quality of internal purity. One class may be easily united and perhaps fight with great, whereas in a national revolutionary war, guerrilla units are faced with the problem of internal unification of different class groups. This necessitates the use of propaganda, both types of guerrilla. Presumably, Mao here Lessons of Civil War, by S.I. Gusev, published 1918 by the Staff Armed Ukraine, revised in 1921 and published by JIZ, Moscow, reprinted in 1958 by the Military Publishing House, Moscow, SBG. 48. Yu Kai-chan. War are, however, similar in that they both employ the same military methods. National guerrilla warfare, though historically of the same consistency, has employed varying implements as times, peoples, and conditions. The guerrilla aspects of the Opium War, those of the fighting in Manchuria since the Mukden incident, and those employed in China today are slightly different. The guerrilla warfare conducted by the Moroccans against the French and the Spanish was not exactly similar to that which we conduct today in China. These differences express the characteristics of different peoples in different periods. Although there is a general similarity in the quality of these struggles, there are dissimilarities in form. This fact we must recognize. Clausewitz wrote, in On War, wars in every period have independent forms and independent conditions, and, therefore, every period must have independent theory of war. Lenin, in On Guerrilla War, Fair, said, as regards the form of fighting, it is unconditionally requisite that history be investigated in order to discover the conditions of environment, the state of economic progress, and the political ideas that obtained, the national characteristics, customs, and degree of civilization. Again, it necessary to be completely unsympathetic to abstract formulas and rules and to study with sympathy the conditions of the actual fighting, for these will change in accordance with the political and economic situations and the realization of the people's aspirations. These progressive changes in conditions create new methods. In today's struggle, we to apply the historical. 49. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Truths of revolutionary guerrilla war. We will into the error of believing with 2HSI Sheng that under the impact of Japan's mechanized army, the guerrilla unit has lost its historical function. Genshi Shan writes, in olden days, guerrilla warfare was part of regular strategy, but there almost no chance that can be applied today. These opinions are harmful, if we do not make an estimate of the characteristics peculiar to our anti-Japanese guerrilla war, but on applying to mechanical formulas derived from past history, we are making the mistake of placing our hostilities in the same category as other national guerrilla struggles. If we hold this view, we will simply be beating our heads against a stone wall and we will be unable to profit from guerrilla. To summarize, what the guerrilla war of resistance against Japan 41 aspect of the entire war, which, although alone incapable of producing the decision, attacks the enemy in every quarter, diminishes the extent of area under his control, increases our national strength, and assists our regular armies. It is one of the strategic instruments used to defeat on our enemy. It is the one pure expression of anti-Japanese policy, that to say, it is military strength organized by the active people and separable from them. It is a powerful special weapon with which we the Japanese and without which we can not defeat them. 50. The relation of guerrilla hostilities to regular operations. The general features of orthodox hostilities, the war of position and the war of move that is meant, differ fundamentally from guerrilla warfare. There are other readily apparent differences such as those in organization, armament, equipment, supply, command, in conception of the terms front and in the matter of military responsibilities. Full stop. When considered from the point of view of numbers, guerrilla units are many, as individual combat units. They may vary in size from the smallest, of several score or several hundred men, to the battalion or the regiment, of several thousand. This not the case in regularly organized units. Primary feature of guerrilla operations there. Dependence upon the people themselves organize battalions and OTHEX units. As a result of organization depends largely upon local circumstances. In the case of guerrilla groups, the standard of equipment of a low order, and they must depend for their sustenance primarily upon what the locality affords. 51. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. The strategy of guerrilla warfare manifestly unlike that employed in orthodox operations, as the basic tactic of the former constant activity and movement. There is in guerrilla warfare no such thing as a decisive battle. There nothing comparable to the fixed, passive defense that characterizes orthodox war. In guerrilla warfare, the transformation of a moving situation into a positional defensive situation never the general features of reconnaissance, partial deployment, general deployment, and development of the attack that are usual in mobile warfare are not common in guerrilla war. There are differences also in the matter of leadership and command. In guerrilla warfare, small units acting independently play the principal and there must be no excessive interference with their. In orthodox warfare, particularly in a moving situation, a certain degree of initiative accorded subordinates, but in principle, command centralized. This done because units and supporting arms in all districts must coordinate the highest degree. In the case of guerrilla warfare, this not undesirable but impossible. Only adjacent guerrilla units can coordinate their activities to any degree. Strategically, their activities can be roughly correlated with those of the regular forces, and they must cooperate with adjacent units of the regular army, but there are no strictures on the extent of guerrilla activity, nor is it really characterized by the quality of cooperation of many units. When we discuss the terms front and rear, must be remembered that while guerrillas do have bases, mere Yukai-chan, primary of activity in the enemy's rear areas, they themselves have no rear, because an orthodox army has rear installations except in some special cases as during the 10,000-mile march of the Red Army, or as in the case of certain units operating in Shanxi province, cannot operate as guerrillas can. As to the matter of military responsibilities, those of the guerrillas are to exterminate small forces of the enemy, to harass and weaken large forces, to attack enemy lines of communication, to establish bases capable of supporting independent operations in the enemy's rear, to force the enemy to disperse his strength, and to coordinate these activities with those of the regular armies on distant backed fronts. From the foregoing summary of differences that exist between guerrilla warfare and orthodox warfare, can be seen that it is improper to compare the two. Further distinction must be made in order to clarify this matter. While the 8th Route Army, a regular army, North China J campaign essentially guerrilla in nature, for operates in the enemy's rear. On occasion, however, 8th Route Army commanders have concentrated powerful forces to strike an enemy in motion, and the characteristics of orthodox mobile warfare were evident in the battle at Pyeongtaek and in other engagements. On the other hand, after the Afungling II, the operations of Central Shanxi and Suyuan troops were more guerrilla than orthodox in nature. In this connection, it has been estimated that the Reds marched about 6,000 miles. See Introduction, Chapter 2, BC 53. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. The precise character of Generalissimo Chiang's instructions to the effect that independent brigades would carry out guerrilla operations should be recalled. In spite of such temporary, these orthodox units retained their identity, and after the Afungling II, they not only were able to fight along orthodox lines but often found necessary to do this. An example of the fact that orthodox armies may, due to changes in the situation, temporarily function as guerrillas. Likewise, guerrilla units formed from the people may gradually develop into regular units and, when operating as such, employ the tactics of orthodox mobile war. While these units function as guerrillas, they may become poet to innumerable gnats, which, by biting a giant both in front and in rear, ultimately exhaust him. They make themselves as unendurable as a group of cruel and hateful devils, and as they grow and attain gigantic proportions, they will find that their victim not only exhausted but practically perishing. It is for this very reason that our guerrilla activities are a source of constant mental worry to Imperial Japan. While it is improper to confuse orthodox with guerrilla operations, it is equally improper to consider that there a chasm between the two, while differences do similar appear under certain conditions, and this fact must be appreciated. We wish to establish clearly the relationship between the two. If we consider both types of warfare as a single subject, or we confuse guerrilla warfare with the mobile operations of orthodox war, we into this error, we exaggerate the function of guerrillas and minimize. 54. Yukai-chan, guerrilla warfare. That of the regular armies. If we agree with Chang So who says, guerrilla warfare at primary war strategy of a people seeking to emancipate, or with Ko Kang, who believes that guerrilla strategy the only strategy possible for an oppressed people, we are exaggerating the importance of guerrilla. What these zealous friends have just quoted do not realize: if we do not guerrilla operations into their proper niche, we cannot promote them. Then, not only would those who oppose us take advantage of our varying opinions to turn them to their own uses to undermine us, but guerrillas would be led to assume respite they could not successfully discharge, and that should properly be carried out by orthodox forces. In the meantime, the important guerrilla function of coordinating activities with the regular forces would be neglected. Furthermore, the theory that guerrilla warfare our only strategy were actually applied, the regular forces would be weakened, we would be divided in purpose, and guerrilla hostilities would decline. If we say, let us transform the regular forces into guerrillas, and do not place our reliance on a victory to be gained by the regular armies over the enemy, we may certainly expect to see as a result the failure of the anti-Japanese war of resistance. Fetch concept that guerrilla warfare an end in end. That guerrilla activities can be divorced from those of the regular forces incorrect. If we assume that guerrilla warfare does not progress from beginning to end beyond elementary forms, we have failed to recognize the fact that guerrilla hostilities can, under specific conditions, develop. 55. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. And assume orthodox characteristics. An opinion that admits the existence of guerrilla war, but isolates it, is one that does not properly estimate the potentialities of such war. Equally dangerous the concept that condemns guerrilla war on the ground that war has no other aspects than the purely orthodox. This opinion, often expressed by those who have seen the corrupt phenomena of some guerrilla regimes, observed their lack of discipline, and have seen them used as a screen behind which certain persons have indulged in bribery and other corrupt practices. These people will not admit the fundamental necessity City for guerrilla bands that spring from the armed people. They say, only the regular forces are capable of conducting guerrilla operations. This theory a mistaken one and would lead to the abolition of the People's Guerrilla War. A proper conception of the relationship that exists between guerrilla effort and that of the regular forces we believe can be stated this way. Guerrilla essential. Operations during the anti-Japanese war may for ascertain time and temporarily become paramount feature, particularly insofar as the enemy's reconnaissance. However, we view the war as a whole, there can be no doubt that our regular forces are of primary importance, because it is they who are alone capable of producing the decision. Guerrilla warfare them in producing this favorable decision. Orthodox forces may under certain conditions operate as guerrillas, and the latter may, under certain conditions, develop to the status of the former. However, both guerrilla forces and regular forces have their own respective development and their proper combinations. 56. Yu Kai-chan. To clarify the relationship between the mobile aspect of orthodox war and guerrilla war, we may say that general agreement exists that the principal element of our strategy must be mobility. With the war of movement, we may at times combine the war of position. Both these are assisted by general guerrilla hostilities. It is true that on the battlefield mobile war often becomes positional. It is true that this situation may be reversed. It is equally true that each form may combine with the other. The possibility of such combination will become more evident after the prevailing standards of equipment have been raised. For example, in a general strategical counterattack to recapture the key and lines of communication, would be normal to use both mobile and positional methods. However, a point must again be made that our fundamental strategical form must be the war of movement. If we deny we cannot arrive at the victorious solution of the war, in some we must promote guerrilla warfare as a necessary strategical auxiliary to orthodox operations. We must neither assign the primary position in our war strategy nor substitute for mobile and positional warfare as conducted by orthodox forces. 57. 3. Guerrilla warfare in history. Guerrilla warfare, neither a product of China nor peculiar to the present day, from the earliest historical days, has been a feature of wars fought by every class of men against invaders and oppas under suitable conditions, has great possibilities. The many guerrilla wars in history have their points of difference, their peculiar characteristics, their varying processes and conclusions, and we must respect and profit by the experience of those whose blood was shed in them. What a pity it is that the priceless experience gained during the several hundred wars waged by the peasants of China cannot be marshaled today to guide us. Our only experience in guerrilla hostilities has been that gained from the several conflicts that have been carried on against us by foreign imperialisms, but that experience should help the fighting Chinese recognize the necessity for guerrilla warfare and should confirm them in confidence of ultimate victory. In September 1812, the Frenchman Napoleon, in the course of swallowing of Europe, invaded Russia at the head of a great army totaling several 100,000 infantry, cavalry, and at that time, Russia was 58. Yu Kai-chan. Weakened her ill-prepared army was not concentrated. The most important phase of her strategy was the use made of Cossack cavalry and detachments of peasants to carry on guerrilla operations. After giving up Moscow, the Russians formed 9 guerrilla divisions of about 500 men each. These, and vast groups of organized peasants, carried on partisan warfare and continually harassed the French army. When the French army was withdrawing, cold and starving, Russian guerrillas blocked the way and, in combination with regular troops, carried out counter attacks on the French rear, pursuing and defeating them. The army of the heroic Napoleon was almost entirely annihilated, and the guerrillas captured many men, cannon, and though the victory was the result of various factors, and depended largely on the activities of the regular army, the function of the partisan groups was extremely important. The corrupt and poorly organized country that was Russia defeated and destroyed an army led by the most famous soldier of Europe and won the war. In spite of the fact that her ability to organize guerrilla regimes was not fully developed, at times, guerrilla groups were hindered in their operations and the supply of equipment and arms was insufficient. We use the Russian saying, was a case of a bat between thee and the axe. From 1918 to 1920, the Russian Soviets, because of the opposition and intervention of foreign imperialisms and the internal disturbances of white Russian groups, were forced to organize themselves in occupied territories and fight a real war, in Siberia and Alishan, in the rear of the army. 59. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Of the traitor Denikin and in the rear of the Poles, there were many Red Russian guerrillas. These not only disrupted and destroyed the communications in the enemy's rear but also frequently prevented his advance. On one occasion, the guerrillas completely destroyed a retreating white army that had previously been defeated by regular Red forces, Kolchak, Denikin, the Japanese, and the Poles. Owing to the necessity of staving off the attacks of Guer, were forced to withdraw regular troops from the front. Thus not only was the enemy's manpower impoverished but he found himself unable to cope with the ever-moving guerrilla. The development of guerrillas at that time had only reached the stage where there were detached groups of several thousands in strength, old, middle-aged, and young. The old men organized themselves into propaganda groups known as silver-hulled units. There was a suitable guerrilla activity for the middle-aged. The young men formed combat units, and were even groups for the children. Among the leaders were determined communists who carried on general political work among the people. These, although they opposed the doctrine of extreme guerrilla warfare, were quick opposed who condemned experience us that orthodox armies are the fundamental and principal power, guerrilla units are secondary to them, and in the accomplishment of the mission assigned the regular forces many of the guerrilla regimes in Russia gradually developed until in battle they were able to sec 48 N, SBG. 60. Yu Kai-chan. Charge functions of organized regulars. The army of the famous General Galen was entirely derived from guerrillas. During 7 months in 1935 and 1936, the Abyssinians lost their war against the cause of defeat. Aside from the most important political reasons for that, there were sentient political groups, no strong government party, and unstable policy, was the failure to adopt a positive policy of mobile warfare. There was never a combination of the war of movement with large-scale guerrilla operations. Ultimately, the Abyssinians adopted a purely passive defense, with the result that they were unable to defeat the Italians, in addition to the fact that Abyssinia, relatively small and sparsely populated country, was contributory, even in spite of the fact that the Abyssinian army and equipment were not modern. She was able to withstand a mechanized Italian force of 400,000 for 7 months. During that period, there were several occasions when a war of movement was combined with large-scale guerrilla operations to strike the Italians heavy blows. Moreover, several were retaken and casualties 140,000 were inflicted. Had this policy been steadfastly continued, would have been difficult to have named the ultimate winner. At the present time, guerrilla activities continue in Abyssinia, and the internal political questions can be solved. An extension of such activities probable. In 1841 and 1842, when brave people from San Yuan Li fought the English, again from 1850 to 1864, during the Taiping War, and for a third time in 1899, in the Boxer Uprising, guerrilla tactics were employed. A remarkable Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare degree. Particularly was this so during the Taiping War, when guerrilla operations were most extensive and the Siachen troops were often completely exhausted and forced to flee for their lives. In these wars, there were no guiding principles of guerrilla action. Perhaps these guerrilla hostilities were not carried out in conjunction with regular operations, or perhaps there was a lack of coordination, but the fact that victory was not gained was not because of any lack in guerrilla activity but rather because of the interference of politics in military. Experience shows that priest ensign given to the question of conquering the enemy in both political and military and regular hosts are not conducted with tenacity. Guerrilla operations alone cannot produce final victory. From 1927 to 1936, the Chinese Red Army fought most continually and employed guerrilla constantly. At the very beginning, a positive policy was adopted. Many bases were established, and from guerrilla bands, the Reds were able to develop into regular armies. As these armies fought, new guerrilla regimes were developed over a wide area. These regimes coordinated their efforts with those of the regular forces. This policy accounted for the many victories gained by guerrilla troops, relatively few in number, who were armed with weapons inferior to those of their opponents. The leaders of that period properly combined guerrilla operations with a war of movement, both strategically and they depended primarily upon alertness. They stressed the correct basis for both political and military operations. They developed 62 Yu Kai-chan, their guerrilla bands into trained units. They then determined upon a 10-year period of resistance, during which time they overcame innumerable difficulties and have only lately reached their goal of direct participation in the anti-Japanese war. There no doubt that the internal unification of China now a permanent and definite fact, and that the experience gained during our internal struggles has proved to be both necessary and advantageous to us. In the struggle against Japanese imperialism, there are many valuable lessons we can learn from the experience of those years. Principal among them the fact that guerrilla success largely depends upon powerful political leaders who work unceasingly to bring about internal unification. Such leaders must work with the people. They must have a correct conception of the policy to be adopted as regards both the people and the enemy. After the 18th of September, 1931, strong anti-Japanese guerrilla campaigns were opened in each of the 3 northeast provinces. Guerrilla activity persists there in spite of the cruelties and deceits practiced by the Japanese at the expense of the people, and in spite of the fact that her armies have occupied the land and oppressed the people for the 7 years. The struggle can be divided into 2 periods, during the which extended from September 18, 1931, to January, 1933, anti-Japanese guerrilla activity exploded constantly in 3 provinces. Mao Chanshan and SSU Pingwei established an anti-Japanese regime in Heilongjiang. In Kailin, the National Salvation Army and the Self-Defense Army were led by Wang Tilin and Li Tu respectively. In Fengtian, Chulu and others. 63. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Commanded guerrilla units. The influence of these forces was great. They harassed the Japanese unceasingly, but because there was an indefinite political goal, improper leadership, failure to coordinate military command and operations and to work with the people, and Failure to delegate proper political functions to the army, the whole organization was feeble, and strength was not unified. As a direct result of these conditions, the campaigns failed and the troops were finally defeated by our enemy. During the second period, which has extended from January 1933 to the present time, the situation has greatly improved. This has come about because great numbers of people who have been oppressed by the enemy have decided to because of the participation of the Chinese communists in the anti-Japanese war, and because of the fine work of the volunteer units, the guerrillas have finally educated the people to the meaning of guerrilla warfare, and in the Northeast, has again become an important and powerful influence. Already 7 or 8 guerrilla regiments and a number of independent platoons have been formed, and their activities make necessary for the Japanese to send troops after them month after month. These units hamper the Japanese and undermine their control in the Northeast, while, at the same time, they inspire a nationalist revolution in Korea. Such activities are not merely of transient and local importance but directly contribute to our ultimate victory. However, there are some weak points. For instance, national defense policy has not been sufficiently developed. 64. Yu Kai-chan. Participation of the people not general, internal political organization I still in primary stages, and the force used to attack the Japanese and the puppet governments. Not yet sufficient, but present policy continued tenaciously, these weaknesses will be overcome. Experience proves that guerrilla war will develop to even greater proportions and that, in spite of the cruelty of the Japanese and the many methods they have devised to cheat the people, they cannot extinguish guerrilla activities in the 3 northeastern provinces. The guerrilla experiences of China and of other Khan that have been outlined prove that in a war of revolutionary nature such hostilities are possible, natural and necessary. They proved that the present anti-Japanese war for the emancipation of the masses of the Chinese people to gain ultimate victory, such hostilities must expand tremendously. Why? We historical experience written in iron and blood must point out that the guerrilla campaigns being waged in China today are a page in history that has no precedent. Their influence will not be confined solely to China in her present anti-Japanese war but will be worldwide. 65. Can victory be attained by guerrilla operations? Guerrilla hostilities 316 but one fallacy of the war of resistance against Japan, and the answer to the question of whether or not they can produce ultimate victory can be given only after investigation and comparison of elements of our own strength with those of the enemy. The particulars of such a comparison are several. The strong Japanese bandit nation and absolute monarchy. During the course of her invasion of China, she had made comparative progress in the techniques of industrial production and in the development of excellence, and in her army, navy, and force, but in spite of this industrial progress, she remains an absolute monarchy of inferior physical endowments. Her manpower, her raw materials, and her financial resources are inadequate and insufficient to maintain her in protracted warfare or to meet the situation presented by a war prosecuted over a vast area. Added to this the anti-war feeling now manifested by the Japanese people, a feeling that shared by the junior and, more extensively, by the soldiers of the invading army. Furthermore, China not Japanese. 66. In Kai-chan. Only enemy, Japan unable to employ her entire strength in the attack on China. She cannot, at most, spare more than 1 million men for this purpose, as she must hold any in excess of that number for use against other possible opponents. Because of these important primary considerations, the invading Japanese bandits can hope neither to be victorious in a protracted struggle nor to conquer a vast area. Their strategy must be one of lightning war and speedy decision. If we can hold out for 3 or more years, will be most difficult for Japan to bear up under the strain. In the war, the Japanese brigands must depend upon lines of communication linking the principalest routes for the transport of war materials. The most important considerations for her are that her rear be stable and peaceful and that her lines of communication be intact. It is not to her advantage to wage war over a vast area with disrupted lines of communication. She cannot disperse her strength and fight in a number of places, and her greatest fears are thus eruptions in her rear and rupture of her lines of communication. She can maintain communications, she will be able at will to concentrate powerful forces speedily at strategic points to engage our organized units in decisive battle. Another important Japanese objective to profit from the industries, finances, and manpower in captured areas and with them to augment her own insufficient strength. Certainly, it is not to her advantage to forego these benefits, nor to be forced to dissipate her energies in a type of warfare in which the gains will not compensate for the losses. It is for these reasons. 67. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. That guerrilla warfare conducted in each bit of conquered territory over a wide area will be a heavy blow struck at the Japanese bandits. Experience in the 5 northern provinces as well as in Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Anhui has absolutely established the truth of this assertion. China, a country half colonial and half feudal, it is a country that politically, militarily, and economically backward. This is an inescapable conclusion. It is a vast country with great resources and tremendous population. A country in which the terrain complicated and the for communication are poor. All these factors favor a protracted war. They favor the application of mobile warfare and guerrilla operations. The establishment of innumerable anti-Japanese bases behind the enemies. Lines will force him to fight unceasingly in many places. At once, both to his front and his rear he thus endlessly expends his resources. We must unite the strength of the army with that of the. We must make war every flanks, in his front, in his rear where and cause dispersal of his forces and dissipation of his strength. Thus the time will come when a gradual change will become evident in the relative position of ourselves and our enemy, and when that day comes, will be the beginning of our ultimate victory over the Japanese. Although China's population great, it is unorganized. This a weakness which must be taken into account. The Japanese bandits have invaded our country not 68. Yu Kai-chan. Merely to conquer territory but to carry out the violent, rapacious, and murderous policy of their government. Which the extinction of the Chinese race. For this compelling reason, we must unite the nation without regard to parties or classes and follow our policy of resistance to the end. China today not the China of old. It is not like Abyssinia. China today at the point of her greatest historical progress. The standards of literacy among the masses have been raised. The rapprochement of communists and nationalists has laid the foundation for an anti-Japanese war front that constantly being strengthened and expanded. Government, army, and people are working with great energy. The raw material resources and the economic strength of the nation are waiting to be used. The unorganized people becoming an organized nation. These energies must be directed toward the goal of protracted war so that should the Japanese occupy much of our territory or even most of we shall gain final victory. Not only must those behind our lines organize for France but also those who live in Japanese occupied territory in every part of the country. Traitors who accept the Japanese as fathers are few in number, and those who have taken oath that they would prefer death to abject merely to conquer territory but to carry out the violent, rapacious, and murderous policy of their government. Which the extinction of the Chinese race. For this compelling reason, we must unite the nation without regard to parties or classes and follow our policy of resistance to the end. China today not the China of old. It is not like Abyssinia. China today at the point of her greatest historical progress. The standards of literacy among the masses have been raised. The rapprochement of communists and nationalists has laid the foundation for an anti-Japanese war front that constantly being strengthened and expanded. Government, army, and people are working with great energy. The raw material resources and the economic strength of the nation are waiting to be used. The unorganized people becoming an organized nation. These energies must be directed toward the goal of protracted war so that should the Japanese occupy much of our territory or even most of we shall gain final victory. Not only must those behind our lines organize for France but also those who live in Japanese occupied territory in every part of the country. Traitors who accept the Japanese as fathers are few in number, and those who have taken oath that they would prefer death to abject slavery are many. We with this what enemy can we not conquer, and who can say that ultimate victory will not be ours? The Japanese are wagging a barbaric war along uncivilized. For that reason, Japanese of classes oppose the policies of their government, as do vast international 69. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Groups, on the other hand, because China's cause are right. Us, our countrymen of classes and parties are united to oppose the invader. We have sympathy in many foreign countries, including even Japan. This perhaps the most important reason why Japan will lose and China will win. The progress of the war for the emancipation of the Chinese people will be in accord with these. The guerrilla war of resistance will be in accord with these. And that guerrilla operations correlated with those of our regular forces will produce victory. The conviction of the many patriots who devote their entire strength to guerrilla hostilities. 70. Organization for guerrilla warfare. Our points must be considered under this subject. These are: how are guerrilla bands formed? 1. 2. How are guerrilla bands organized? What are the methods of arming guerrilla bands? What elements constitute a guerrilla band? Capital J. These are questions pertaining to the organization of armed guerrilla units. They are questions which those who have had no experience in guerrilla hostilities do not understand and on which they can arrive at no sound decisions. Indeed, they would not know in what manner to begin. How guerrilla units are originally formed. The unit may originate in any one of the following ways. A. From the masses of the people. B. From regular army units temporarily detailed for the purpose. C. From regular army units permanently detailed. 71. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. D. From the combination of a regular army unit and a unit recruited from the people. XE. From the local militia. F. From deserters from the ranks of the enemy. Y. G. From former bandits and bandit groups. In the present, no doubt, these sources will be employed. In the case above, the guerrilla unit formed from the people. This the fundamental type. Upon the arrival of the enemy army to oppress and slaughter the people. Their leaders upon them too. They assemble the most valorous elements, arm them with old or bed guns, and thus a unit begins. Orders have already been issued throughout the nation that upon the PI to form guerrilla units both for local defense and for other combat. If the local governments approve and aid such movements, they cannot prosper. In some places, where the local government not determined or where officers have alfled, the leaders among the masses call upon the people to and they respond. Thus, many guerrilla units are organized. In circumstances of this kind, the duties of leadership usually upon the shoulders of young students, teachers, professors, other educators, local soldiery, professional men, artisans, and those without a fixed profession, who are willing to exert themselves to the drop of their blood. Recently, in Shanxi, Hophe, Chahar, Suiyuan, Shantung, Chikiang, Anhui, Kiangsu, 72, Yukai-chan, and other provinces, extensive guerrilla hostilities have broken out. All these are organized and led by patriots. The amount of such activity the best proof of the foregoing statement. The more such bands there are, the better will the situation be. Each county should be able to organize a great number of guerrilla squads, which, when assembled, form a guerrilla company. There are those who say, I am a farmer, I am a student, I can discuss literature but not military arts. This incorrect. There no profound difference between the farmer and the soldier. You must have courage. You simply leave your farms and become soldiers. That you are farmers of no difference, and you have education. That S6 much the better. When you take your arms in hand, you become soldiers. When you are organized, you become military units. Guerrilla hostilities are the university of war, and after you have fought several times valiantly and aggressively, you may become a leader of troops, and there will be many well-known regular soldiers who will not be your peers. Without question, the fountainhead of guerrilla warfare in the masses of the people, who organize guerrilla units directly from themselves. The second type of guerrilla unit, that which organized from small units, the regular forces temporarily detached for the purpose. For example, since hostilities commenced, many groups have been temporarily detached from armies, divisions, and brigades and have been assigned guerrilla duties. A regiment of the regular army may, circumstances warrant, be dispersed into groups for the 73. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Purpose of carrying on guerrilla operations. As an example of the 8th Route Army, in North China, excluding the periods when carries on mobile operations. As an army, it is divided into elements and these carry on guerrilla. This type of guerrilla unit is for two reasons in mobile warfare situations. The coordination of guerrilla activities with regular operations necessary. Second, until guerrilla hostilities can be developed on a grand scale, there no one to carry out guerrilla missions but regulars. Historical experience shows us that regular army units are not able to undergo the hardships of guerrilla campaigning over long periods. The leader of regular units engaged in guerrilla operations must be extremely adaptable. They must study the methods of guerrilla war. They must understand that discipline and the employment of stratagems are of the utmost importance. As the guerrilla status of regular units but temporary, their leaders must lend possible support to the organization of guerrilla units from among the people. These units must be so disciplined that they hold together. After the departure of the regulars, the third type of unit consists of a detachment of regulars who are permanently assigned guerrilla duties. This type of small detachment does not have to be prepared to rejoin the regular forces posted somewhere in the rear of the enemy, and there becomes the backbone of guerrilla organization. As an example of this type of organization, we may take the Taishan district in the heart of the Hophe-Chahar-Shanxi area. Along the borders of these provinces, units from the 8th Route Army have 74. Yukai-chan, guerrilla warfare. Established a framework for guerrilla operations. Around small corps, many detachments have been organized, and the area of guerrilla activity greatly expanded. In a region in which there a possibility of cutting the enemy's lines of supply, this system should be severing enemy supply routes destroys his lifeline. This one feature that cannot be neglected at the time the regular forces withdraw from a certain area. Some units are behind. These should conduct guerrilla operations in the enemy's rear. As an example we have the guerrilla bands now continuing their independent operations in the Shanghai Wusong area in spite of the withdrawal of regular forces. The fourth type of organization, the result of a merger between small regular detachments and local guerrilla units. Regular forces may dispatch a squad, a platoon, or a company, which placed at the disposal of the local guerrilla commander. If a small group experienced in military and political affairs is sent, becomes the core of the local guerrilla unit. These several methods are excellent, and properly applied, the intensity of guerrilla warfare can be extended. In the Taishan area, each of these methods has been used. The type mentioned above formed from the local militia, from police and home guards. In every North China province, there are now many of these groups, and they should be formed in every. The government has issued a mandate to the effect that the people are not to depart from war areas. The in command of the county, the commander of the peace preservation unit, the chief of police are required to obey this mandate. They 75. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Cannot retreat with their forces but must remain at their stations and MHE 6th type unit that organized from troops that come over from the enemy, the Chinese traitor troops employed by the Japanese. It is always possible to produce disaffection in their ranks, and we must increase our propaganda efforts and foment mutinies among such troops. Immediately after mutinying, they must be received into our ranks and organized. The concord of the leaders and the assent of the men must be gained, and the units rebuilt politically and reorganized militarily. Once this has Being accomplished, they become successful guerrilla units. In regard to this type of unit, may be said that political work among them of the utmost importance. The seventh type of guerrilla organization that formed from bands of bandits and brigands. This, although difficult, must be carried out with utmost vigor. The enemy use such bands to his own advantage. Many bandit groups pose as anti-Japanese guerrillas, and it is only necessary to correct their political beliefs to convert them. In spite of inescapable differences in the fundamental types of guerrilla bands, it is possible to unite them to form a vast sea of guerrillas. The ancients said, Taishana, great mountain because does not scorn the merest hand. Full of the rivers and seas are deep because they absorb the waters of small streams. Attention paid to the ment and organization of guerrillas of every type and from every source will increase the potentialities of guerrilla action in the anti-Japanese war. This is something that patriots will not neglect. 76. Yukai-chan, guerrilla warfare. The method of organizing guerrilla regimes. Many of those who decide to participate in guerrilla activities do not know the methods of organization. For such people, as well as for students, WHQ have no knowledge of military the matter of organization, a problem that requires solution. Even among those who have military knowledge, there are some who know nothing of guerrilla X regimes because they are lacking in that particular type of experience. The subject of the organization of such regimes not confined to the organization of specific units but includes guerrilla activities within the area where the regime functions. As an example of such organization, we may take a geographical area in the enemy's rear. This area may comprise many counties, must be subdivided and individual companies or battalions formed to accord with the sub-divisions. To this military area, a military commander and political commissioners are appointed. Under these, the necessary, both military and are appointed. In the military headquarters, there will be the staff, the aides, the supply, and the medical personnel. These are controlled by the chief of Ho. Acts in accordance with orders from the commander. In the political headquarters, there are bureaus of propaganda, organization, people's mass movements, and miscellaneous affairs. Control of these vested in the political chairman. The military areas are subdivided into smaller I accordance with local geography, the enemy situation locally, and the state of guerrilla development. Each of 77. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. These smaller divisions within the area, each of which may consist of from 2 to 6 counties. To each stroke, a military commander and several political commissioners are appointed. Under their direction, military and political headquarters are organized. Tasks are assigned in accordance with the number of guerrilla troops available. Although the names of the in the correspond to those in the larger area, the number of functionaries assigned in the former case should be reduced to the least possible, in order to unify control, to handle guerrilla troops that come from different sources, and to harmonize military operations and local political. A committee of from 7 to 9 members should be organized in each area, and this committee, the members of which are selected by the troops and the local political, should function as a forum for the discussion of both military and political matters. All the people in an area should arm themselves and be organized into 2 groups. Any of these groups a combat group, the other a self-defense unit with but limited quality. Regular combatant guerrillas are organized into one of 3 general types of unit. The of these JS the Sinol unit, the platoon or company. In each county, 3 to 6 units may be organized. Second type, I battalion of from 2 to 4 companies. One such unit should be organized in each county, while the unit fundamentally belongs to the county in which was organized, may operate in other counties, while in areas other than own, must operate in conjunction with local units in order to take advantage of their manpower. There. 78. Yukai-chan. Knowledge of local terrain and local customs, and their information of the enemy. The third type, the guerrilla segment, which consists of from 2 to 4 of the above-mentioned battalion units. If sufficient manpower available, a guerrilla brigade of from 2 to 4 regiments may be formed. Each of the units has own peculiarities of organization. A squad, the smallest unit, has a strength of from 9 to 11 men, including the leader and the assistants. Leader arms may be from 2 to 5 Western style rifles, with the remaining men armed with of local manufacture, bed guns, spears, or big swords. 2 to 4. Such squads form a platoon. This, too, has a leader and an assistance leader, and when acting independently, it is assigned a political officer to carry on political propaganda. The platoon may have about 10, with the remainder of weapons being bed guns, lances, and big swords. 2 to 4 of such units form a company, which, like the platoon, has a leader, an assistance leader, and a political. All these units are under the direct supervision of the military commanders of the areas in which they operate. The battalion unit must be more thoroughly organized and better equipped than the smaller units. Discipline and personnel should be superior. If a battalion formed from company units, should not deprive subordinate units entirely of their manpower and their arms in a small area. There a peace preservation corps, a branch of the militia, or police. Regular guerrilla units should not be dispersed over. 79. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. The guerrilla unit next in size to the battalion regiment. This must be under more severe discipline than The battalion. In an independent guerrilla regiment, there may be 10 men per squad, 3 squads per platoon, 3 platoons per company, 3 companies per battalion, and 3 battalions to the regiment. 2 of such regiments form a brigade. Each of these units has a commander, a vice commander, and a political. In North China, guerrilla cavalry units should be established. These may be regiments of from to 4 companies, or battalions. All these units from the lowest to the highest are combatant guerrilla units and receive their supplies from the central government. Details of their organization are shown in the tables. All the people of both sexes from the ages of 16 to 45 must be organized into anti-Japanese self-defense units, the basis of which voluntary service. As a step, they must procure arms, then they must be given both military and political training. Their responsibilities are local sentry duties, securing information of the enemy, arresting and preventing the dissemination of enemy propaganda. When the enemy launches a guerrilla suppression drive, these units, armed with what weapons there are assigned to certain areas to deceive, hinder, and harass him. Thus, the self-defense units. Combatant guerrillas, they have other functions. They furnish stretcher bearers to transport the wounded, carriers to take food to the troops, and comfort missions to provide. See Appendix, SBG 80. In Kai-Chan, guerrilla warfare. Why the troops with T and Ifilokati can organize such a self-defense unit as we have described, the traitors can not hide, nor can bandits and robbers disturb the peace of the people. Thus the people will continue to the guerrillas and supply manpower to our regular armies. TI. Organization of self-defense units, a transitional step in the development of universal conscription. Such units are reservoirs of manpower for the orthodox forces. There have been such organizations for some time in Shanxi, Henan, and Suiyuan. Tilja youth organizations in different provinces were formed for the purpose of educating the young. They have been of some help. However, they were not voluntary, and the confidence of the people was thus not gained. These organizations were not widespread, and their effect was almost negligible. This system was, therefore, supplanted by the new type organizations, which are organized on the principles of voluntary cooperation and non-separation of the members from their native. When the members of these organizations are in their native towns, they support themselves. Only in case of military necessity are they ordered to remote places, and when this done, the government must support them. Each member of these groups must have a weapon, even the weapon only a knife, a lance, or a spear. In places where the enemy operates, these self-defense units should organize within themselves a small guerrilla group of perhaps from 3 to 10 men armed with pistols or revolvers. This group not required to leave native locality. 8i. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. The organization of these self-defense units Manwai shined in this book because such units are useful for the purposes of inculcating the people with military and polit knowledge, keeping order in the rear, and replenishing the ranks of the regulars. These groups should be organized not only in the active war zones but in every province in China. The people must be inspired cooperate vol. We must not force them, for we will be unfairly ineffectual. This extremely important. The organization of a self-defense army similar to that we have mentioned shown in Table 5. In order to control anti-Japanese military organization as a whole, it is necessary to establish a system of military areas and along the lines we have indicated. The organization of such areas and districts is shown in Table 6. Equipment of guerrillas. In regard the problem of guerrilla equipment, must be understood that guerrillas are lightly armed attack groups, which require simple equipment. The standard of equipment based upon the nature of duties assigned. The equipment of low-class guerrilla units not as good as that of higher-class units. For example, those who are as signed the task of destroying railroads are better equipped than those who do not have that task. The equipment of guerrillas cannot be based on what the guerrillas want, or even what they need, but must be based on what is available for their use. Equipment cannot be furnished. Unfortunately, this table, as well as table was omitted from edition of Yu Kai-Chan available to me, SBG 82. Yu Kai-Chan. Immediately but must be acquired gradually. These are points to be kept in mind. The question of equipment includes the collection, supply, distribution, and replacement of weapons, ammunition, blankets, communication materials, transport, and for propaganda work, the supply of weapons and ammunition most particularly at the time the unit established, but this problem can always be solved. Eventually, guerrilla bands that originate in the people are furnished with revolvers, bed guns, spears, big swords, and landmines and mortars of local manufacture. Other elementary weapons are added and as many new type as are available are distributed. After a period all resistance, it is possible to increase the supply of equipment by capturing from the enemy. In this respect, the transport companies are the easiest to equip, for in any successful attack, we will capture the enemy's transport. An armory should be established in each guerrilla dis for the manufacture and repair of and for the production of cartridges, hand grenades, and bayonets. Guerrillas must not depend too much on an armory. The enemy the principal source of their supply. For destruction of railway trackage, bridges, and stations in enemy-controlled territory, it is necessary to gather demolition materials. Troops must be trained in the preparation and use of demolitions, and a demolition unit must be organized in each regiment. As for minimum clothing requirements, these are that each man shall have at least 2 summer weight uniforms, j. 1 suit of winter clothing, 2 hats, a pair of output j. 83. Mao Tse-Tung on GT guerrilla warfare. G's, and a blanket. Each man must have a haversack or bag for food. In the north, each man must have an overcoat. In acquiring this clothing, we cannot depend on captures made from the enemy, for it is forbidden for captors to take clothing from their prisoners. IJLODLIA. Maintain hiren oral in guerrilla force SJLL. The Zlathigar and equipment mentioned should be furnished. Bilge representatives of the government stationed in each guerrilla district. These men may confiscate clothing from traitors or ask contributions from those best able to afford them. In subordinate groups, uniforms are unnecessary. Telephone and radio equipment not necessary in lower groups, but units from regiment up are equipped with both. This material can be obtained by contributions from the regular forces and by capture from the enemy. In the guerrilla army in general, and at bases in particular, there must be a high standard of medical equipment. Besides the services of the doctors, medicines must be procured. Although guerrillas can depend on the enemy for some portion of their medical supplies, they must, in general, depend upon contributions. If Western medicines are not available, local medicines must be made too. The problem of transport more in North China than in the south, for in the south that are necessary are mules and horses. Small guerrilla units need no animals, but regiments and brigades will find them necessary. Commanders and of units from companies up should be furnished a riding animal each. At times, two will have to share a horse. Officers whose duties are of minor nature do not have to be mounted. 84. Yukai-chan. Propaganda materials are very important. Every large guerrilla unit should have a printing press and a mimeograph stone. They must also have paper on which to print propaganda and notices. They must be supplied with chalk and large brushes. In guerrilla areas, there should a printing press or a lead type press for the purpose of printing training instructions. This material of the greatest importance. In addition to the equipment listed above, it is necessary to have glasses, compasses, and military maps. An accomplished guerrilla group will acquire these things because of the proved importance of guerrilla hostilities. In the anti-Japanese war, the headquarters of the national government and the commanding of the various war zones should do their best to supply the guerrillas with what they actually need and are unable to get for themselves. However, must be repeated that guerrilla equipment in the main depend on the efforts of the guerrillas themselves. If they depend on higher too much, the psychological effect will be to weaken the guerrilla spirit of resistance. Elements of the guerrilla army. The term element as used in the to this section refers to the personnel, both and men, of the guerrilla army. Since each guerrilla group fights in protracted war, its officers must be brave and positive men whose entire loyalty dedicated to the cause of emancipation. JPF the EAPL, and should have the following qualified powers of endurance so that in spite of any 85. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. How should he sets an example to his men and a model for why them? He must be able to mix easily with the people. His and that of the men must be one in strengthening the policy of resistance to the Japanese. If he wishes to gain victories, he must study. A guerrilla group with officers of this caliber would be unbeatable. Do not mean that every guerrilla group can have, at inception, of such qualities. The officers must be men naturally endowed with good qualities which can be developed during the course of campaigning. The most important natural quality is that of complete loyalty to the idea of people's emancipation. If this present, the others will develop. If it is not present, nothing can be done. When are selected from a group, it is this quality that should receive particular attention. The inner group should be inhabitants of the locality in which the group organized, as this will facilitate relations between them and the local civilians. In addition, officers so chosen would be familiar with conditions. If in any locality there are not enough men of sufficiently high qualifications to become, an effort must be made to train and educate the people so these qualities may be developed and the potential increased. There can be no disagreements between officers native to one place and those from other. A guerrilla group ought to operate on the principle that only volunteers are acceptable for service. It is a mistake to impress people into service. As long as a person willing his social condition or position no consideration, but only men who are courageous and determined can bear the hardships of guerrilla campaigning in a protracted war. Yukai-chan. A soldier who habitually breaks regulations must be dismissed from the army. Vagabonds and vicious people must not be accepted for service. The opium habit must be forbidden, and a soldier who cannot break himself of the habit should be dismissed. Victory in guerrilla war conditioned upon keeping the membership pure and clean. It is a fact that during the war the enemy may take advantage of certain people who are lacking in conscience and patriotism and induce them to join the guerrillas for the purpose of betraying them. Must, therefore, continually educate the soldiers and inculcate patriotism in them. This will prevent the success of the traitors who are in the ranks must be discovered and expelled, and punishment and expulsion meted out to those who have been influenced by them. In such cases, the officers should summon the soldiers and relate the facts to them, thus arousing their hatred and detestation for. This procedure will serve as well as a warning to the other soldiers. If an officer is discovered to be a somi, Prudence must be used in the punishment adjudged. However, the work of eliminating in the army begins with their elimination from among the people. Chinese soldiers who have served under puppet governments and bandits who have been converted should be welcomed as individuals or as groups. They should be well treated and repatriated, but care should be used during their reorientation to distinguish those whose ID to fight the Japanese from those who may be present for other reasons. The political problems of guerrilla warfare. In Chapter 1, I mentioned the fact that guerrilla troops should have a precise conception of the goal of their struggle and the political organization to he used in attaining THGT goal. This means that both organization and discipline of guerrilla troops must be at a high level so that they can carry out the political activities that are the of both the guerrilla armies and of revolutionary warfare. Of political activities depend upon the indoctrination of both military and political leaders with the idea of anti-Japanism. Through them, the ID transmitted to the troops. One must not feel that he anti-Japanese merely because he a member of a guerrilla unit. The anti-Japanese idea must be an ever-present conviction, and if it is forgotten, we may succumb to the temptations of the enemy or be overcome with discouragements. In a war of long duration, those whose conviction that the people must be emancipated not deep-rooted are likely to become shaken in their faith or actually revolt, without the general education that enables everyone to understand. Yukai-chan, guerrilla warfare. Our goal of driving out Japanese imperialism and establish a free and happy China. The soldiers fight without conviction and lose their determination. The political goal must be clearly and precisely indicated. Inhabitants of guerrilla zones and their national conscientiousness awakened. Hence, a concrete explanation of the political systems used important not only to guerrilla troops but to those who are concerned with the realization of our political goal. Tli Kuomintang has issued a pamphlet entitled System of National Organization, which should be widely distributed throughout guerrilla zones. We lack national organization. We will lack the essential unity that should exist between the soldiers and the people. A study and comprehension of the political objectives of this war and of the anti-Japanese front particularly important for officers of guerrilla troops. Here are some militarists who say, we are not interested in politics but only in the profession of arms. It is vital that these simple-minded militarists be made to realize the relationship that exists between politics and military. Military action is a gift to attain a political goal. While military and political affairs are not identical, it is impossible to isolate one from the other. It is to be hoped that the world in the era of the vast majority of human beings have already prepared or are preparing to fight a war that will bring justice to the oppressed peoples of the world. No matter how long this war may, there no doubt that will be followed by an unprecedented epoch of peace, the war that we are. 89. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Fighting today for the emancipation of the Chinese a part of the war for the freedom of human beings, and the independent, happy, and liberal China that we are fighting to establish will be a part of that new world order. A conception like this is difficult for the simple-minded militarist to grasp and must therefore be carefully explained to him. There are three additional matters that must be considered under the broad question of political. These are political activities, first, as applied to the troops, second, as applied to the people, and, third, as applied to the enemy. The fundamental problems are, spiritual unification of and men within the army, second, spiritual unification of the army and the people, and destruction of the unity of the enemy. The concrete methods for achieving these unities are discussed in detail in pamphlet number 4 of this, entitled Political Activities in Anti-Japanese Guerrilla Warfare. A revolutionary army must have discipline. The test tab list on a limited democratic in armies, obedience of the subordinates to their superiors must be exacted. This true in the case of guerrilla discipline, but the basis for guerrilla discipline must be the individual conscience. With guerrillas, a discipline of compulsion ineffective. In any revolutionary army, their unity of purpose as far as both and men are concerned, and, therefore, within such an army, discipline self-imposed, although discipline in guerrilla ranks not as severe as in the ranks of orthodox forces, the necessity for discipline this must be self-imposed, because only when it is the soldier. 90. Yukai-chan able understand completely why he fights and why he must obey. This type of discipline becomes a tower of strength within the army, and it is the only type that can truly harmonize the relationship that exists between and soldiers. In any system where discipline externally imposed, the relationship that exists between officer and man is characterized by indifference of the one to the other. The idea that can physically beat or severely tongue-lash their men a feudal one and not in accord with the conception of a self-imposed discipline. Discipline of the feudal type will destroy internal unity and fighting strength. A discipline self-imposed primary characteristic of a democratic system in the army. A secondary characteristic found in the degree of liberties accorded and soldiers. In a revolutionary army, individuals enjoy political liberty and the Cheyenne, JGR exemplary. The emancipation of the people must not only be tolerated but discussed, and propaganda must be encouraged. Further, in such an army, the mode of the and the soldiers must not differ too much, and this particularly true in the case of guerrilla troops. Officers should live under the same conditions as their men, for that the only way in which they can gain from their men the admiration and confidence so in war, it is incorrect hold to a theory of equality in things, but there must be equality of existence in accepting the hardships and dangers of war, thus we may attain the unification of the soldier groups, a unity both horizontal within the group and vertical, that 91. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. From lower to higher echelons, it is only when such unity present that units can be said to be powerful. Combat factors. There also unity of that should exist between troops and local inhabitants. The 8th Root Army put into practice a code known as the 3 Rules and the 8 Remarks, which we hear. All actions are subject to command. Do not steal from the people, be neither nor unjust. Remarks. Replace the door when you leave the house. Roll up the bedding on which you have. Be courteous. Be honest in your transactions. Return what you borrow, replace what you break. Do not bathe in the presence of women. Do not without authority search the pocketbooks of those you. The Red Army adhered this code for 10 years and the 8th Root Army and other units have since adopted. Many people think impossible for guerrillas to exist for long in the enemy's rear. Such a belief reveals lack of in summer, were frequently lifted OFL and used as beds. SBG. 92. Yu Kai-chan. Prehension of the relationship that should exist between the people and the troops. The former may be likened to water how may be and the latter to the who inhabit said that these two cannot exist together. It is only undisciplined troops who make the people their enemies and who, like the out of native element, cannot we further our mission of destroying the enemy by propagandizing his troops, by treating his captured soldiers with consideration, and wiring for those of his wounded who into our hands. If I fail in these respects, we strengthen the solidarity of our enemy. 93. The strategy of guerrilla resistance against Japan. It has been definitely decided that in the strategy of our war against Japan, guerrilla strategy must be auxiliary to fundamental orthodox methods. If this were a small country, guerrilla activities could be carried out close to the scene of operations of the regular army and directly complementary to them. In such a case, there would be no question of guerrilla strategy as such, nor would the question arise our country were as strong as Russia, for example, and able speedily to eject an invader. The Tion exists because China, a weak country of vast has today progressed to the point where has become possible to adopt the policy of a protracted war characterized by guerrilla operations. Although these may at glance seem to be abnormal or heterodox, such not actually the case. Because Japanese military power inadequate, much of the territory her armies have overrun without sufficient garrison troops. Under such circumstances the primary functions of guerrillas are 3, to conduct a war on exterior that in the rear of the enemy, second, to 94. W. Kai-chan. Establish bases, and, to extend the war areas, thus. Guerrilla participation in the war not merely a matter of purely local guerrilla tactics but involves strategical considerations. Such war, with vast time and space factors, establishes a new military process, the focal point of which China today, the Japanese are apparently attempting to recall a past that saw the Yin extinguish the Sung and the Siege conquer the Ming, that witnessed the extension of the British Empire to North America and India, that saw the Latins overrun Central and South America. As far as China today concerned, such dreams of conquest are fantastic and without today's China better equipped than was the China of yesterday, and a new type of guerrilla hostilities a part of that equipment. If our enemy to take these facts into consideration and makes too optimistic an estimate of the situation, he courts Aster. Tlaiu the strategy of guerrillas inseparable from war strategy as a whole, the actual conduct of these HOS differs from the conduct of orthodox operations. Each type of warfare has methods peculiar to, and methods suitable to regular warfare cannot be applied with success to the special situations that confront guerrillas. Before we treat the practical aspects of guerrilla war, might be well to recall the fundamental axiom of combat, on which military action based. This can be stated. Conservation of one's own strength, destruction of enemy strength. A military policy based on this axiom can. 95. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Sonant with a national policy directed towards the building of a free and prosperous Chinese state and the destruction of Japanese imperialism. It is in furtherance of this policy that government applies military strength, the sacrifice demanded by war in conflict with the idea of self-preservation, not at the sacrifices demanded are necessary both to destroy the enemy and to preserve ourselves, the sacrifice of a part of the people necessary to preserve the whole. All the considerations of military action are derived from this axiom, application as apparent in tactical and strategical conceptions as it is in the simple case of the soldier who shoots at his enemy from a covered position. All guerrilla units start from nothing and grow. What methods should we select to ensure the conservation and development of our OVM strength and the destruction of hat of the enemy? The essential requirements are the 6 listed below. Retention of the alertness, carefully planned JI tactical attacks in a war of strategical defense, tactical speed in a war strategically protracted, tactical operations on exterior lines in a war conducted strategically on interior V conduct of operations to complement those of the regular army. Y the establishment of bases. Point 74. A clear understanding of the relationship that exists between the attack and the defense. 5. The development of mobile operations. 6. Correct command. 96. Yu Kai-chan. The enemy, though numerically weak, strong in the quality of his troops and their equipment, we, on the other hand, are strong numerically but weak as to quality. These considerations have been taken into account in the development of the policy of tactical offense, tactical speed, and tactical operations on exterior lines in a war that, strategy, cally speaking, defensive in character, protracted in nature, and conducted along interior. Our strategy. Based on these conceptions, they must be kept in mind in the conduct of operations. Although the element of surprise not absent in orthodox warfare, there are fewer opportunities to apply than there are during guerrilla. In the speed essential, the movements of guerrilla troops must be secret and of supernatural rapidity. The enemy must be taken unaware, and the action entered speedily. There can be no procrastination in the execution of plans, no assumption of a negative or passive defense, no great dispersion of forces in many local engagements. The basic method, the attack in a violent and deceptive form. While there may be cases where the attack will extend over a period of several days, if that length of time necessary to annihilate an enemy group, it is more profitable to launch and push an attack with maximum speed. The tactics of defense have no place in the realm of guerrilla warfare. A delaying action necessary. Such places as river crossings and villages offer the most suitable conditions, for it is in such places that the enemy's arrangements may be disrupted and he may be annihilated. The enemy much stronger than we are, and it is true. 97. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Doubt that we can hinder, distract, disperse, and destroy him only. We disperse our own forces. Although guerrilla warfare is the warfare of such dispersed units, it is sometimes desirable concentrate in order to destroy an enemy. Thus, the principle of concentration of force against a relatively weaker enemy applicable to guerrilla warfare. UV can prolong this struggle and make OFA protracted war only by gaining positive and lightning-like tactical decisions, by employing our manpower in proper concentrations and dispersions, and by operating on exterior lines in order to surround and destroy our enemy. If we cannot surround whole armies, we can at least partially destroy them. We cannot the Japanese, we can capture them. The effect of many local successes will be to change the relative strengths of the opposing forces. The destruction of Japan's military power, combined with the international sympathy for China's cause and the revolutionary tendencies evident in Japan, will be sufficient to destroy Japanese imperialism. We will next discuss alertness, and the matter of careful planning. What meant by initiative in war? Fair, in battles and wars, a struggle to gain and retain. The initiative goes on between the opposing, for it is the side that holds the initiative that has liberty of action. When an army loses the initiative, it loses liberty, role becomes passive, faces the danger of defeat and destruction. It is more difficult to obtain the initiative when defending on interior lines than it is while attacking on exterior. 98. Yu Kai-chan. He is what Japan doing. There are, however, several weak points as far as Japan concerned. One of these lack of sufficient manpower for the another her cruelty to the inhabitants of conquered areas, a third the underestimation of Chinese strength, which has resulted in the differences between military cliques, which, in turn, have been productive of many mistakes in the direction of her military forces. For instance, she has been gradually compelled to increase her manpower in China while, at the same time, the many arguments over plans of operations and disposition of troops have resulted in the loss of good opportunities for improvement of her strategical position. This explains the fact that although the Japanese are frequently able to surround large bodies of Chinese troops, they have never yet been able to capture more than a few, the Japanese military machine thus being weak by insufficiency of manpower, inadequacy of resources, the barbarism of her troops, and the general stupidity that has characterized the conduct of operations. Her offensive continues unabated, but because of the weaknesses pointed out, her attack must be limited in extent. She can never conquer China. The day will come, indeed, already has in some areas, when she will be forced into passive. When commenced, China was passive, but as we enter the second phase of the war, we find ourselves pursuing a strategy of mobile warfare, with both guerrillas and regulars operating on exterior. Thus, with each passing day, we see some degree of initiative from the Japanese. 99. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. The matter of initiative is especially serious for guerrilla forces, who must face situations unknown to regular troops. The superiority of the enemy and the lack of unity and experience within our own ranks may be cited. Guerrillas can, however, gain the initiative they keep in mind the weak points of the enemy. Because of the enemy's insufficient manpower, guerrillas can operate over vast. Because he a foreigner and a barbarian, guerrillas can gain the confidence of millions of their countrymen. Because of the stupidity of enemy command, guerrillas can make full use of their own cleverness. Both guerrillas and regulars must exploit these enemy weaknesses while, at the same time, our own are remedied. Some of our weaknesses are apparent only and are, in actuality, sources of strength. For example, the very fact that most guerrilla groups are small makes desirable and advantageous for them to appear and disappear in the enemy's rear. With such, the enemy simply unable to cope. A similar liberty of action can rarely be obtained by orthodox forces. When the enemy attacks the guerrillas with more than one column, it is difficult for the latter to retain any error, no matter how slight, in the estimation of the situation likely to result in forcing the guerrillas into A passive, they will then find themselves unable to beat off the attacks of the enemy. It is apparent that we can gain and retain the initiative only by a correct estimation of the situation and a proper arrangement of military and political factors. A too pessimistic estimate will operate to force us into a passive go. Yi Kai-chan. Position, witly consequent of an overly optimistic estimate, with rash ordering of factors, will produce the same. No military leader endowed by heaven with an ability to seize the initiative. It is the intelligent leader who does so after a careful study and estimate of the situation and arrangement of the military and political factors involved. When a guerrilla unit, through either a poor estimate on the part of leader or pressure from the enemy, forced into a passive position, its first duty to extricate. No method can be prescribed for as the method to be employed will, in every case, depend on the situation. 1. Can, necessary, run away, but there are times when the situation seems hopeless and, in reality, is not so at all. It at such times that the good leader recognizes and seizes the moment when he can regain the lost initiative. Let us revert to alertness. To conduct one's troops with alertness, an essential of guerrilla command. Leaders must realize that to operate ality, the most important factor in gaining the initiative and in effect on the relative situation that exists between our forces and those of the enemy. Guerrilla commanders adjust their operations to the enemy situation, to the terrain, and to prevailing local conditions. Leaders must be alert to sense changes in these factors and make necessary modifications in troop dispositions to accord with them. The leader must be like the fisherman, who, with his nets, able both to cast them and to pull them out in awareness of the depth of the water, the strength of the current, or the presence of any obstructions that may foul them, as the fisherman controls. Loy. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. His nets through the lead ropes, so the guerrilla leader maintains contact with and control over his units. As the fisherman must change his position, so must the guerrilla commander. Dispersion, concentration, constant change of position. It is in these ways that guerrillas employ their strength. In general, guerrilla units disperse to operate when the enemy in overextended defense, and a sufficient force cannot be concentrated against him. Guer must disperse, harass him, and demoralize him. When encircled by the enemy, guerrillas disperse to withdraw. When the nature of the ground limits action, J3. Guerrillas disperse. When the availability of supplies limits action, they disperse. Guerrillas disperse in order to promote mass movements over a wide area. Regardless of the circumstances that prevail at the time of dispersal, caution must be exercised in certain matters. A relatively large group should be retained as a one central force. The remainder of the troops should not be divided into groups of absolutely equal in this way, the leader in a position to deal with any circumstances that may. 2. Each dispersed unit should have clear and definite responsibilities. Orders should specify a place to which to I-02. Kai-chan, guerrilla warfare. Proceed, the time of proceeding, and the place, time, and method of assembly. Why guerrillas concentrate when the enemy advancing upon them, and their opportunity to upon him and destroy him. Concentration may be desirable when the enemy on the defensive and guerrillas wish to destroy isolated detachments in particular. By the term concentrate, we do not mean the assembly of manpower but rather of only that necessary for the remaining guerrillas are assigned missions of hindering and delaying the enemy, of destroying isolated groups, or of conducting mass propaganda. In addition, the dispersion and concentration of forces. The leader must understand what termed alert shifting. When the enemy feels the danger of guerrillas, he will generally send troops out to attack them. The guerrillas must consider the situation and decide at what time and at what place they wish to fight. If they find that they can not, they must immediately then the enemy may be destroyed piecemeal. For example, after a guerrilla group has destroyed an enemy detachment at one place, may be shifted to another area to attack and destroy a second detachment, sometimes, will not be profitable. For a unit become engaged in a certain area, and in that case, must move immediately. When the situation serious, the guerrillas must move with the fluidity of water and the ease of the blowing wind. They must deceive, tempt, and confuse the enemy. They must let the enemy to believe that they will attack. 103. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Him from the east and north, and they must then strike him from the west and the south. They must strike, then rapidly disperse. They must move at night. Guerrilla initiative expressed in dispersion, concentra, tion, and the alert shifting of forces. If guerrillas are stupid and obstinate, they be led to passive positions and severely damaged. Skill in conducting guerrilla operations, however, not in merely understanding the things we have discussed but rather in their actual application on the field of battle, the quick intelligence that constantly watches the ever-changing situation and able to seize on the right moment for decisive action found only in keen and thoughtful observers. Careful planning necessary victory to be won in guerrilla war, and those who fight without method do not understand the nature of guerrilla action. A plan necessary regardless of the size of the unit involved. A prudent plan as necessary in the case of the squad as in the case of the regiment. The situation must be carefully studied, then an assignment of duties made. Plans must include both political and military instruction, the matter of supply and equipment, and the matter of cooperation with local civilians. Without study of these factors, it is impossible either to seize the initiative or to operate alertly. It is true that guerrillas can make only limited plans, but even the factors we have mentioned must be considered. The initiative can be secured and retained only follow. I'm a positive victory that results from attack. The attack must be made on guerrilla initiative, that guerrillas must not permit themselves to be maneuvered into a position. 104. Kai-chan. Where they are robbed of initiative and where the decision to attack forced upon them, any victory will result from careful planning and alert control. Even in defense, our efforts must be directed toward a resumption of the attack. For it is only by attack that we can extinguish our enemies and preserve ourselves. A defense or withdrawal entirely useless as far as extinguishing our enemies concerned and of only temporary value as far as the conservation of our forces concerned. This principle valid both for guerrilla and regular troops. The differences are of degree only, that to say, in the manner of execution. The relationship that exists between guerrillas and the orthodox force is important and must be appreciated. Generally speaking, there are three types of cooperation between guerrillas and orthodox groups. These are strategical cooperation, 2. Tactical cooperation, battle cooperation. Guerrillas who harass the enemy's rear installations and hinder his transport are weakening him and encouraging the national of resistance. They are cooperating strategically. For example, the guerrillas in Manchuria had no functions of strategical cooperation with orthodox forces until the war in China started. Since that time, their function of strategical cooperation evident, for they can 1. Make the enemy expend 1 round of ammunition, or hinder one enemy group in advance. 105. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Southward, our powers of resistance here are proportionately increased. Such guerrilla action has a positive action on the enemy nation and on troops, while, at the same time, encourages our own countrymen. Another example of strategical cooperation furnished by the guerrillas who operate along the Pien-Sui, Pien-Town, Chinpiu, Tiung Pu, and Shangtianhui railways. This cooperation began when the invader attacked, continued during the period when he held garrisoned in the areas, and was intensified when our regular forces counterattacked, in an effort to restore the lost territories. As an example of tactical cooperation, we may cite the operations Hsing-Kau, when guerrillas both north and south of Yemen destroyed the Tiun-Piu railway and the motor roads near Pien-Tsing Pass and Jiangfang-Kau. A number of small operating bases were established, and organized guerrilla action in Shanxi complemented the activities of the regular forces both there and in the defense of Henan. Similarly, during the South Shantung campaign, guerrillas in the northern provinces cooperated with the army's operation on the Suchao front. Guerrilla commanders in rear areas and those in command of regiments assigned to operate with orthodox units must cooperate in accordance with the situation. It is their function to determine weak points in the enemy dispositions, to harass them, to disrupt their transport, and to undermine their morale. If guerrilla action were independent, the results be obtained from tactical cooperation would be and those that result from strategical cooperation greatly diminished. In order to accomplish their 06 Kai-chan mission and improve the degree of cooperation, guerrilla units must be equipped with some means of rapid communication. For this purpose, two-way radio sets are recommended. Guerrilla forces in the immediate battle area are responsible for close cooperation with regular forces. Their principal functions are to hinder enemy transport, to gather information, and to act as outposts and sentinels, even without precise instructions from the commander of the regular forces. These missions, as well as any others that contribute to the general success, should be assumed. The problem of establishment of bases of particular importance. This so because this war a cruel and protracted struggle, the territories can be restored only by a strategical counterattack, and this we cannot carry out until the enemy well into China. Consequently, some part of our country, indeed, most of it, may be captured by the enemy and become his rear area. It is our task to develop intensive guerrilla warfare over this vast area and convert the enemy's rear into an additional front. Thus the enemy will never be able to stop fighting. In order to subdue the occupied territory, the enemy will have to become increasingly severe and oppressive. A guerrilla base may be defined as an area, strategically located, in which the guerrillas can carry out their duties of training, self-preservation and development, ability to fight a war without a rear area of fundamental character of guerrilla action, but this does not mean that guerrilla can exist and function over a long period of time without the development of base areas. History shows of 107. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Many examples of peasant revolts that were unsuccessful, and it is fanciful to believe that such movements, characterized by banditry and brigandage, could succeed in this era of improved communications and military equipment. Some guerrilla leaders seem to think that those qualities are present in today's movement, and before such leaders can comprehend the importance of base areas in the long-term war, their minds must be disabused of this idea. The subject of bases may be better understood. We consider the various categories of bases: 2 guerrilla areas and base areas, the establishment of bases, the development of bases. Guerrilla bases may be classified according their location as, first, mountain bases, second, plains bases, and last, river, lake, and bay bases. The advantages of bases in mountainous areas are evident. Those which are now established are Changpiao-chan, Wu-Tai-shan, Taihang, Shan, Taishan, Yanshan, and Maoshan, these bases are strongly protected. Similar bases should be established in all enemy rear areas. Plains country generally not satisfactory for guerrilla operating bases, but this does not mean that guerrilla warfare cannot flourish in such country or that bases cannot be established there. The extent of guerrilla development in Hoppa and West Shantung proves the opposite to be the case. Whether we can count on the use of these bases. 08. Yukai-chan, guerrilla warfare over long periods of time questionable. We can, however, establish small bases of a seasonal or temporary nature. This we can do because our barbaric enemy simply does not have the manpower to occupy the areas he has overrun, and because the population of Chin is so numerous that a base can be established anywhere. Seasonal bases in plains country may be established in the winter when the rivers are frozen over, and in the summer when the crops are growing. Temporary bases may be established when the enemy otherwise occupied. When the enemy advances, the guerrillas who have established bases in the plains area are to engage him. Upon their withdrawal into mountainous country, DI should leave behind them guerrilla groups dispersed over the entire area. Guerrillas shift from base to base on the theory that they must be one place one day and another place the next. There are many historical examples of the establishment of bases in bay and lake country, and this one aspect of our activity that has so far received attention. Red guerrillas held out for many years in the Hunts. We should establish bases in the Hunts Lake region and tie areas and along rivers and watercourses in territory controlled by the enemy so as to deny him access and free use the water routes. There a difference between the terms base area and guerrilla area. An area completely surrounded by territory Wu occupied by the enemy. Base area. Taishan, and Taihenshan are examples of base areas. Wu Tai on the other hand, the area east and north of Shanaguer. 109. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare. Area. Such areas can be controlled by guerrillas only while they actually physically occupy them. Upon their departure, control reverts to a puppet pro-Japanese government. East Hophe, for example, was at a guerrilla area rather than a base area. A puppet government functioned there. Eventually, the people, organized and inspired by Wu guerrillas from the Tai Mountains, assisted in the transformation of this guerrilla area into a real base area. Such a task extremely, for it is largely dependent upon the degree to which the people can be inspired. In certain garrisoned areas, such as the zones contiguous to the railroads, the guerrillas are unable to drive the Japanese and puppets out. These areas remain guerrilla areas. At other times, base areas might become guerrilla areas due either to our own mistakes or the activities of the enemy. Obviously, in any given area in the war zone, any one of three situations may develop. The area may remain in Chinese hands, maybe to the Japanese and puppets, or may be divided between the combatants. Guerrilla leaders should endeavor to see that either the or the of these situations are shot. Another point essential in the establishment of bases: the cooperation that must exist between the armed guerrilla bands and the people. All our strength must be used to spread the doctrine of armed resistance to Japan, arm the people, to organize self-defense units, and train guerrilla bands. This doctrine must be spread among the people, who must be organized into anti-Japanese groups. Their political instincts must be sharpened and their Yukai-chan outer increased. If the workers, the farmers, the lovers of Betty, the young men, the women, and the children are not organized, they will never realize their own anti-Japanese power. Only the united strength of the people can recover the measure of political power that has been and conserve and improve what we retain. We have already touched on geographic factors in our discussion of bases, and we must also mention the economic aspects of the problem. What economic policy should be adopted? Any such policy must offer reasonable protection. We to commerce and business interpret reasonable protection mean that people must contribute money in proportion the money they have. Farmers will be required to furnish a certain share of their crops to guerrilla troops. Confiscation, except in the case of businesses run by traitors, is prohibited. Our activities must be extended over the entire periphery of the base area we wish to attack the enemy's bases and thus strengthen and develop our own. This will afford us opportunity to organize, equip, and train the people, thus furthering guerrilla policy as well as the national policy of protracted war. At times, we must emphasize the development and extension of base areas. At other times, the organization, training, or equipment of the people. Each guerrilla base will have own peculiar problems of attack and defense. In general, the enemy, in an endeavor to consolidate his gains, will attempt to extinguish guerrilla bases by dispatching numerous bodies of troops over a number of different routes. This must be anticipated. 3. Mao Tse-Tung on guerrilla warfare and the encirclement broken by counterattack. As such enemy columns are without reserves, we should plan on our main forces to attack one of them by surprise and devote our secondary effort to continual hindrance and harassment. At the same time, other forces should isolate enemy garrison troops and operate on their lines of supply and communication. When one column has been disposed, we may turn our attention to one of the others. In a Wu Taishan, for example, there are base area as large as 4 or 5 military subdivisions. Guerrillas in these subdivisions must cooperate to form a primary force to attack the enemy, or the area from which he came, while a secondary force harasses and hinders him. After defeating the enemy in any area, we must take Advantage of the period he requires for reorganization. We must not attack an objective, press home our attacks we are not certain of winning. We must confine our operations to relatively small areas and destroy the enemy and traitors in those places. When the inhabitants have been inspired, new volunteers accepted, trained, equipped, and organized, our operations may be extended to include and lines of. We may hold these at communication not strongly held. Least for temporary periods. All these are our duties in offensive strategy. Their object. To lengthen the period that the enemy must remain on the defensive. Then our military activities and our organization work among the masses of the people must be zealously expanded, and with equal zeal, the strength of the enemy attacked and diminished. It is of great importance that 112. Yukai-chan. Guerrilla units be rested and instructed. During such times as the enemy on the defensive, the troops may get some rest and instruction may be carried out. The development of mobile warfare is not only possible, but essential. This the case because our current war, desperate and protracted struggle. If China were able to conquer the Japanese bandits speedily and to recover her lost territories, there would be no question of long-term war on a national scale. Hence, there would be no question of the relation of guerrilla warfare and the war of movement. Exactly the opposite actually the case. In order to ensure the development of guerrilla hostilities into mobile warfare of an orthodox nature, both the quantity and quality of guerrilla troops must be improved. Primarily, more men must join the armies, then the quality of equipment and standards of training must be improved. Political training must be emphasized and our organization, the technique of handling our weapons, our tactics, must be improved. Our internal discipline must be strengthened. The soldiers must be educated politically. There must be a gradual change from guerrilla formations to orthodox regimental organization. The necessary bureaus and body political and military must be provided. At the same time, attention must be paid to the creation of suitable supply, medical, and hygiene units. The standards of equipment must be raised and types of weapons increased. Communication equipment must not be forgotten. Orthodox standards of discipline must be established. 113. Mao Tse-Tung guerrilla warfare. Because guerrilla formations act independently and because they are the most elementary of armed formations, command cannot be too highly centralized. If it were, guerrilla action would be too limited in scope. At the same time, guerrilla, to be most effective, must be coordinated, not only insofar as they themselves are concerned, but additionally with regular troops operating in the same areas. This coordination a function of the war zone commander and his. In guerrilla base areas, the command must be centralized for strategical purposes and decentralized for tactical purposes. Centralized strategical command takes care of the general management of guerrilla units, their coordination within war zones, and the general policy regarding guerrilla base areas. Beyond centralization of command will result in interference with subordinate units. Naturally, the to apply to concrete situations can be determined only as these various situations. This true in orthodox warfare when communications between lower and higher echelons break down. In a word, proper guerrilla policy will provide for unified strategy and independent activity. Each guerrilla area divided into, and these in turn are divided into sub-districts. Each subdivision has appointed commander, and while general plans are made by higher commanders, the nature of actions determined by inferior commanders. The former may suggest the nature of the action to be taken but cannot define one has. Inferior groups have more or complete local control. 114. Appendix. Notes. Each squad consists of from 9 to 11 men. In case men or arms are not sufficient, the third platoon may be dispensed with, or one squad organized as company headquarters. The mobile propaganda unit consists of members of the company who are not relieved of primary duties except to carry out propaganda when they are not fighting. 3. If there are insufficient personnel, the medical section is not separately organized. There are only 2 or 3 medical personnel. They may be attached to the administrative section. 4. There no barber is unimportant. There an insufficient number of cooks. Any member of the company may be designated to prepare food. Each combatant soldier should be armed with the rifle. There are not enough rifles. Each squad should have 2 or 3 shotguns, lances, and big swords can also be furnished. The distribution of rifles does not have to be equalized in platoons. As may be necessary, different missions are assigned to platoons, to give one platoon more rifles than the others. The strength of a company should at the most be 180, divided into 12 squads of 11 men each. The minimum strength of a company should be 82 men, divided into 6 squads of 9 men each. Table 1. Organization of an independent guerrilla company. Company Commander. Political officer, executive officer. Company headquarters, mobile propaganda message section unit. Administrative section. First aid and hospital section, intelligence section. First, second, third platoon. Capital I. 1. 1 squad. Table of organization, guerrilla company. Rank. Personalam. Company leader. Pistol. Political officer. Table 2. Organization of an independent guerrilla battalion. Capital I. Political officer. Battalion commander. Capital I. Executive officer. Capital I. Battalion headquarters and 3 companies. Capital I. Intelligence section. Machine gun. Section. Administrative. Section. Message. Center. Medical. Section. First. Company. Second. Company. Third. Company. Fourth. Company.